The knock came at 11:47 p.m., and Lenny Prue almost didn't answer it. She was 3 hours into a transmission rebuild she'd promised for 7 the next morning, greased to her elbows, hair tied back with a zip tie she'd found on the floor. The radio tuned to a country station out of Thunder Bay that kept cutting to static every time the wind shifted. The garage smelled like gear oil and burnt coffee. The single overhead fluorescent had been flickering since Tuesday. She'd stopped noticing. The knock came again, harder this time. Lenny set down the snap ring pliers and looked at the side door. Not the bay doors. Those were locked and rolled down. But the old steel door on the east wall, the one that led to the parking lot behind the building, the one that wasn't supposed to be used after hours. She wiped her hands on a shop rag and stood still for a second, listening. 3 knocks this time. Deliberate. Patient. Lenny wasn't afraid of much. She'd been working alone in this garage since she was 19 years old. First as a favor to her uncle, then as the only person willing to take on the overnight shifts when no one else would. She knew every sound this building made. The way the roof popped when the temperature dropped. The way the compressor cycled on at random. The way the drain in the corner gurgled for no reason at 2 in the morning. She knew what belonged here and what didn't. What was on the other side of that door didn't belong here. She picked up a breaker bar from the workbench, not because she intended to use it, just because holding something solid helped her think. She unlocked the door and pulled it open. The man standing outside was enormous. Not tall so much as wide, the kind of wide that comes from decades, not from a gym. He was somewhere past 60 with a white beard cropped close to his jaw and gray eyes that didn't waste time blinking. He wore a leather vest over a thermal shirt, and the patches on that vest were not decorative. A Harley sat behind him in the lot, engine ticking as it cooled in the November air. He looked at the breaker bar. He looked at her. "My rear brake locked up on the highway," he said. "Managed to limp her off at the exit. Your lights were on." Lenny looked past him at the bike. A Road Glide, probably 10 years old, well kept. Saddlebags with Manitoba plates. He'd come a long way. She looked back at him. "We're closed," she said. "I can see that." Neither of them moved. Lenny had a rule about nights like this. The rule was simple. The door stays shut, you call it in as a courtesy, and you let the 24-hour shop out on Highway 11 deal with it. That was the rule. She had not invented it. Her boss, a man named Gordon Healy, had given it to her in writing on her first day, along with a list of other rules that mostly boiled down to protecting Gordon Healy's insurance premiums and Gordon Healy's reputation and Gordon Healy's liability exposure in the event that anything went sideways. Gordon Healy was not here at 11:47 p.m. "Come in," Lenny said, and stepped aside. The man's name was Auguste. He told her that when she asked, pulling the bike into the bay with his help, the two of them working in silence because the bike was heavy and the floor was slick and there wasn't much to say. Auguste. No last name offered. She didn't push. He sat on the stool by the parts cabinet while she looked at the rear caliper. The bleeder screw had seized. Brake fluid had overheated and vaporized, which meant the caliper piston was responding to pressure it couldn't release. A vapor lock. Common enough, fixable enough, but not something you wanted to find out about at highway speed when November had made the road greasy and dark. "You're lucky," she said. "I'm told that a lot," Auguste said. He didn't sound like he believed it. She had the parts. That was the thing about working in a shop like this. A shop that handled everything from old domestic trucks to ski-doos that came in with their track torn half off. You kept everything. She'd rebuilt the caliper on a similar model the previous winter and had ordered an extra seal kit because the supplier had a minimum order quantity and it was cheaper to stock it than ship it back. The kit was on the third shelf, still in its original packaging, a little dusty but intact. She got to work. Auguste didn't talk much. He watched her work in a way that wasn't invasive, just attentive. The way someone watches who actually understands what they're seeing. At one point, he asked her about the transmission on the lift behind her, and she told him about the rebuild, and he nodded and said nothing else. But something shifted slightly, like a door opening a crack. Around 1 in the morning, he asked if she'd always worked on bikes. "Mostly trucks," she said. "Bikes are easier, fewer places for problems to hide." "You're good," he said. "I know." He almost smiled. "How long have you been here, this garage?" 4 years. She torqued the bleeder screw to spec and sat back on her heels. "Before that, 2 years at a dealer in Sudbury. Before that, trade school. Before that, my dad's driveway in Timmins." "Timmins," he said. "Yeah, long way from home." "Not that far," she said. "About 7 hours. Seems farther when you stay." She didn't tell him the rest. She didn't tell him about the reason she'd left the dealer in Sudbury, which was that the service manager had taken credit for her diagnostic work on a recall issue that had saved the manufacturer a 7-figure warranty claim, and when she'd raised it with the regional rep, nothing had happened. She didn't tell him about the apartment above a laundromat on Cedar Street, the one she shared with a rotating cast of people, who came and went and rarely learned her name. She didn't tell him about the student loan that still had 4 years left on it, or the way she calculated every grocery run down to the dollar, or the way she'd gotten used to eating toast for dinner when the shifts ran short. She bled the brakes and tested the pedal. Good pressure, clean fluid. She cycled the piston 3 more times to make sure. "Done," she said. Auguste stood up and came to look. He crouched down and examined the caliper, the way a person does when they're not taking anyone's word for it. Then he stood up and nodded. What do I owe you? Parts plus labor. 50 for the kit, 40 for the time. She paused. Hour and a half, but I'll call it one. He paid her in cash. He counted it out from a fold in his vest pocket, not a wallet, just a fold, and he added 20 on top without being asked. For the hour, he said. She took it. He wheeled the road glide back through the bay door and into the lot. He put on his helmet, a full-face black lid with no branding, and he started the bike and let it idle for a moment in the cold. He looked back at her through the open door. You did good work tonight, he said. Then he rode out of the lot and turned north onto the empty street, and the sound of the engine faded in about 30 seconds, and then it was just the wind and the flickering fluorescent and the smell of brake fluid on her hands. Lenny locked the door, went back to the transmission, and didn't think about it again. Gordon Healy arrived at 8:14 the next morning. Lenny knew his arrival by the sound of his truck, a crew cab diesel he'd bought the previous spring and talked about constantly, as though he deserved credit for purchasing it. She heard him pull in, heard the door, heard the particular rhythm of his boots on the concrete that meant he was in a mood. She could tell his moods by the boots. Slow and heavy meant something had already gone wrong. Fast and light meant he wanted something. This was slow and heavy. She was cleaning her workstation when he came in. He looked at the bay. He looked at the floor. There was a small oil stain near the east wall where a goose bike had sat, and some brake dust she hadn't finished sweeping, and the stool was still in the wrong position. Gordon was 53, with a wide, flat face and the particular expression of a man who had spent decades finding things to disapprove of. He had inherited this shop from his father, who had built it with his hands, and he had spent 20 years turning it into something his father would not have recognized, mostly by cutting costs and raising prices and treating the mechanics who stayed long enough to matter as costs to be managed rather than people to be trusted. He looked at the stool. He looked at Lenny. Someone was in here last night, he said. It wasn't a question, Lenny told him. Straight through, no editorializing. The knock, the bike, the seize caliper, the seal kit, the repair, the payment. She put the cash on the workbench in front of him. $90. Gordon looked at the cash for a long time. You let a stranger in here after hours, he said. His brake had locked up. I don't care what had locked up. You let a stranger into my shop after hours, used my parts, used my lift, and did it without calling me. It was after midnight. That is not a reason, he said. That is the opposite of a reason. He picked up the cash and put it in his shirt pocket. You know the policy. You agreed to the policy. His brake had locked up on the highway, she said again. He could have. I don't care, Gordon said. I have insurance considerations. I have liability. If he'd been injured in this bay, if there'd been a fire, if anything. You understand that? Lenny understood that. She also understood that Gordon had, on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 years, asked her to write up repair orders for work she hadn't done, to justify warranty claims that didn't hold up. She had done it because she needed the job. She thought about that sometimes. She was thinking about it now. You're a good mechanic, Gordon said. But I can't have people making decisions like this. He looked at the east wall, at the stain. I'm going to have to let you go. The words landed flat like something dropped on concrete. Lenny didn't say anything. End of the week, Gordon added. I'll do 2 weeks' pay because I'm not unreasonable. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, picked up her snap ring pliers from the bench, put them in her toolbox, and locked the box. She said, okay. Gordon looked slightly irritated that she hadn't argued. He'd expected something. Tears, pushback, and appeal. He'd prepared for that. The quiet was harder. He went into his office and shut the door. The fluorescent had stopped flickering overnight. She'd changed the ballast at 2 in the morning because she'd needed something to do with her hands while the brake fluid settled. The light was steady now, clean and even, and it lit the whole bay without shadows. She finished the transmission. She had promised it for 7, and it was a promise she'd made to a woman named Dorothy who drove a school bus and could not afford for the bus to be off the road. She finished it at noon, torqued every bolt twice, filled the fluid, and drove the bus around the block to check the shift pattern. It was clean, better than clean. She wrote up the invoice, left it on the front desk, and drove home in her truck with the windows down, even though it was November. She spent the next 3 days looking for work. Not in a panicked way. She was not a person who panicked. She made a list, called down the list, and got a series of answers that ranged from "we're not hiring right now" to "we'll keep your application on file," which was the same thing with better grammar. One dealer in town had a position but wanted someone with manufacturer certification she didn't have. Another shop, out on the East End, was hiring, but the owner called her sweetheart twice in the first 5 minutes of the call, and she thanked him for his time and hung up. She looked at her bank account on the 3rd night and did the math. The math was not good. She made a second list. What she could cut, what she couldn't, how many weeks the 2-week severance would carry her if she was careful, how far careful actually went. She had about 10 weeks, maybe 11. She had done this before, not here, but in Sudbury, after the thing with the service manager. She had done it in a smaller apartment with a worse window and less money, and she had come through it, and she could do it again. But she was 26 years old, and she was doing this again. She sat at the kitchen table with the list in front of her and the window behind her, and the sound of the laundromat 3 floors below, the machine cycling and cycling, and she stayed there for a long time in the dark without turning on the light. The call came on a Thursday. She almost didn't answer it. The number was unrecognized, local area code, and most unrecognized local calls were either warranty scams or her landlord's property management company, calling about something she hadn't done. She answered because she was waiting on a callback from a shop in Kapuskasing. "Is this Lenny Prue?" said the voice on the other end. "Yes, my name is Reginald Savard. I'm the operations director for Savard Group." A pause. "I think you may have helped my father a few nights ago." Lenny sat down. She said, the road glide, he said. "Yes, Savard Group." She knew the name the way you know names in a city the size of this one. Not because you'd ever had anything to do with them, but because they were part of the background noise of the place, like the hospital and the pulp mill and the lake. They had 3 dealerships, 2 in the city and 1 in Sault Ste. Marie. They had a fleet maintenance contract with the municipality. They had a building downtown with their name on it. Auguste's last name was Savard. Reginald was speaking again. "My father told me what you did, what you fixed, how late it was, what you charged. He doesn't say much about most things, but he told me." "It was a vapor lock," Lenny said. "He would have figured it out, maybe," Reginald said. "But not on the 17 in the dark in November. You want to know what he told me about you?" She wasn't sure she did. "He said you knew what you were doing, and you were honest about what you charged, and you didn't make him feel like he had to explain himself." Another pause. "That's not nothing." Lenny looked at the wall. "We have a service manager position opening up at the main dealership," Reginald said. "Officially, it's not open yet. We're posting it next week, but I wanted to call you first." She said, "I should tell you something. I was let go from Healy's because I helped your father." "I'm not sure if that." "I know," Reginald said. "I know Gordon Healy. I know what kind of operation he runs." He said it the way people say things they've thought about before and decided not to say more about. She was quiet for a moment. "Can I have until tomorrow?" she said. "Of course," he said. She sat at the table after the call. The laundromat cycled below her. The windows showed the parking lot, the street, a sky that had cleared for the first time in days. There was a single strip of light on the western edge, pale and wide, the kind you get in late November when the sun goes down fast and clean. She thought about the sealed brake line and the cold floor and the road glide coming back to life under her hands. She thought about a man counting cash out of his pocket at 1 in the morning, not from a wallet, just a fold in his vest, and adding 20 without being asked. For the hour, he'd said. She called Reginald back at 8:47 the next morning. "I'll come in," she said. The interview was on a Monday. Not the usual kind, no conference room, no panel, no stack of HR forms to fill out in advance. Reginald met her in the service bay of the main dealership, walking her through it without ceremony, asking her questions while they moved between the lifts and the parts wall and the alignment rack. He asked her about the rear caliper rebuild, walked through it step by step, and she walked him through it without hesitation. He asked her about the transmission. He asked what she would have done differently. She told him. He didn't challenge her answers. He just listened, and she could see from the way he listened that he was actually hearing what she said. At the end, he said, "The hours are better than what you're used to. The pay's better. You'd have 3 mechanics reporting to you," she said. "I've never managed people." "You'll learn," he said. "You already know the hard part." "What's the hard part?" "Giving a damn about the work," he said. "You can teach the rest." Auguste was not there that day. She found out later. From one of the mechanics, a quiet man named Patrice, who knew the history of the place going back to when it was a single bay off a side street, that Auguste Savard had started the company in 1987 with 2 lifts and a phone line, that he had built it through 2 recessions and a fire, that he rode solo every year in the fall up through the North Country alone. No club, no escort, just him and the bike and the roads that his company now serviced. That the patches on the vest were from a loose brotherhood of men and women who had known each other for 30 years and shared no formal name and asked for nothing. That when Auguste Savard said something, the people who worked for him paid attention. That what he had said when he came home from that November ride was this: "There's a mechanic in a garage on Balmoral Street. She's good, and she's stuck." Lenny started on a Wednesday in December, the second week of the month, when there was already a hard frost on the parking lot by 6 in the morning. She came in early because she'd been told she didn't have to, and she always came in early when she didn't have to, because that was the hour when the shop was quiet, and you could hear the machines in the building and make sense of the place before anyone else arrived to have opinions about it. She walked the bay alone in the early dark, the fluorescents humming clean above her, the tools laid out in their proper places, the parts shelves organized with a care that told her something about the people who'd been here before. She ran her hand along the edge of one of the lifts. Clean, well-maintained. Someone had cared about this place for a long time. She thought about the garage on Balmoral Street, the flickering light, the ballast she'd replaced at 2 in the morning. She thought about a knock at a locked door and how close she'd come to not answering it. Not because she'd been afraid. She hadn't been. But because the rules said not to, and she was good at following rules. And she had spent a long time being good at following rules that did not deserve to be followed. She thought about the moment she'd picked up the breaker bar. Not to use it, just to have something solid in her hand. And then she thought about setting it down, and then she thought about opening the door. That was the whole of it, really. A woman at 11:47 at night, standing in a cold bay with grease on her hands and a choice in front of her that the rules said wasn't a choice at all. And she had made it anyway. Not dramatically. Not even consciously, quite. She had simply decided, without fanfare, that a man with a seized brake caliper mattered more than Gordon Healy's insurance premiums, and she had acted accordingly. And then she had gone back to her transmission. She hadn't expected anything to come of it. That, Lenny thought, was maybe the point. Outside the bay window, the lot was turning pale at its edges as the sky lightened over the tree line. A raven landed on the fence post at the far end and looked around with the unimpressed expression ravens have about everything, and then it was gone. She heard the first cars in the lot, Patrice's hatchback with the muffler that wanted attention. Another mechanic she hadn't met yet, the coffee machine in the break room starting its cycle. The day was beginning. Lenny pulled her hair back, zipped her jacket off, hung it on the hook by the lift, and got to work.